This is a video about my Bristol paintings. Ever since moving to the West Country in 1973, Bristol has always been a regular haunt with its museums, galleries, theatres and harbour side. Recently it's become even more important to me because my son and his partner live there with their creative businesses. And in 2020 the Lime Tree Gallery in Hotwells, Bristol started to represent me and my work, which was also extremely exciting. As mentioned in the Bideford video, my work always starts with a small sketchbook and always carried with me. One morning I was on my way to visit my son, who was living in a narrowboat in the Bristol harbour, and on the way I noticed the Bee, which is a ship moored just along from the M shed, and the Bee has the most beautiful lines, which was the first thing that caught my eye when I was there. And this was one of the drawings I started to make with the Bee, and in its context of all the buildings in the shape of the old warehouses. And the next drawing I did was looking at the Bee again, capturing something more of the lines of the Bee, but also looking at the reflections which were in the oily slick water of the harbour. This was quite early morning, and the light was very bright, but the water didn't have a ripple in it, and so we had these beautiful reflections of the Bee in that water. And what intrigued me about this drawing when I got it home was how I'd put the Bee at the top of the composition, and perhaps the majority of the surface was covered with the reflections, and that's something I picked up later on, which I'll discuss when I'm looking at my larger sketchbook. Other sketchbooks and other visits were used. This is a drawing I did around the western end of the harbour at Underfalls yards and Cottage, Quay. Fascinated by all the detritus and accoutrements of the boat repair business, ladders and engines and barrels and so on, and boats up on chocks on the quayside and the shape of the buildings. And here's one which was the interior of part of Underfalls yard, again with all sorts of different tools and buckets and ladders and barrels and so on, and also the boats high up on chocks for repair. And capturing these had to work very quickly because there's lots of people about and it's a very busy area. More detailed drawings followed. This is a drawing I did of that same end of the quay. This is the harbour master's offices down here. Underfalls yard is there. What intrigued me about this was the way the quayside bisects the water and sort of get different patches of reflections around the surface of the composition, and it's fragmented by these other surface details, and I found that interesting. And again, that's something I picked up in drawings and paintings later on. My large sketchbooks played a part in the development of all this. This is a double page of, I just have to open it out here, of the Bee. This was where I was really starting to tackle the lines of the Bee and look for detail and look for a relationship of one part of the form to the other. And then as that moved across, I was looking at some further details, but also down here on the page was starting to explore that idea of the boat being at the top part of the canvas, of a rectangular canvas put in portrait format. And so I had the boat in profile at the top of the canvas, not quite as a silhouette, but certainly occupying very fully that top part of the canvas with detail and so on, and then below that a concentration of the reflections. So it becomes a composition, a relationship, an almost abstract relationship between these two components. And then the large drawings is something as a practice I've developed, as I mentioned in the earlier video, working on drawings not quite the same size but getting close to the same size as the canvas they've eventually produced on. This is a drawing of Matthew and the Bee. This is looking at the Bee from its bow with the M shed behind. Looking behind me was one of the cranes on the quayside that I was leaning against to make the drawing, and the Matthew was moored against the Bee, so we get that beautiful relationship of new and old and all the spars and the rigging crossing over. And in the background we've got the Arnolfini, which I quite like putting that in. And again, lots of reflections, building on the reflections I'd started to build in the earlier painting of the Bee. This is the drawing of the boatyard. What attracted me first of all was this wonderful skeleton against the skyline, and then the skyline's also bisected with the spars of the Great Britain and other masts and so on and rigging. And I found that as a top part of the composition an interesting beginning to the way the piece started to unfold. And then the middle section is the boatyard itself, with boats up on chocks being worked upon, and all the accoutrements of the boatyard with the crane and so on, and that busyness. And then coming down here we have a much quieter, the regularity of the roofs of the canal boats, and the much tranquil setting of the canal boats and these other boats in the reflected water again, which was very still at that time of the morning. So we have these three components which I explored in the drawing before we took it into the painting. This drawing is of Underfalls Yard. I had to work, as I say, work very quickly doing these. But what I loved about this is one of the Bristol ferry boats that's being under repair in the yard, and I love that oblique composition of that, the boat swooping in with its bright colours, swooping into the detail and busyness of the yard. And I'd made other drawings around there of engines and ladders and various other bits and bobs, and moved those round to come up with the composition you'll see on the painting itself. And this is the harbour itself, and I just love the relationship of these three boats, the very hard edged boat here with its metal hull and the anchors played off against these different forms of stern and bow of these two boats. And I love the way these spars bisect the busyness of the quite geometric architecture behind, and the drawing allowed me to explore that and its reflections and what detail I wanted to have and not have in. And whilst I was there was quite a lot of people working on these boats, but I don't put those people in. I worked as a figurative sculptor for 20 years, so I did lots of drawings of people, but I don't put people in my paintings because I do think, a bit like lettering, although I have used lettering in a very conservative way in some of the paintings, I think it's, if the people are in there, the viewer associates with the people and develops a narrative around the people, whereas really it's all the detail in the painting and the relationship of that detail that I want to be seen, and that's where my enjoyment comes. And then at the top we have a drawing of that larger format of the Cottage Quay and the harbour master's area and so on, exploring where I'm going to put those, and also developing the relationship between the reflections in the foreground and how it's bisected by those quay signs. And then there's other paintings and things going on here as well, which will be for a future exhibition, I hope. So thank you very much. I hope that's aided the enjoyment of my paintings from Bristol and been informative to you. Thank you.